While researching for the French-Eversole Feud, I came across stories of the Marcum Wrongful death suit. At that time, I did not know where it fit into the feud series, only that Fulton French was involved. I kept this story in front of me as I knew it was a puzzle piece that must not be forgotten in the stories of the Appalachian Feuds. This will be a multi-part saga, as there are many testimonies of the trial as well as confessions given to what was seen and heard during the court investigation. This trial would lead to the Hargis brothers and Ed Callahan facing charges of conspiracy, and with Fulton French of the French-Eversole Feud being charged with witness tampering, including intimidation of witnesses and encouraging witnesses to make false statements. Come along with us as we walk through one of the most shocking trials of the Appalachian Feuds thus far. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. James Buchanan Marcum's widow. We have covered the death of attorney James Buchanan Marcum and how he was shot in the Jackson, Kentucky courthouse. Now, more details about what happened that fateful day on May 4th, 1903 will unfold. His widow, Florence Hurst Marcum, did not sit still while the assassins of her husband ran free on the streets of Jackson. She was now a widow with 5 children, ranging in age from 18 to babyhood, and she was pregnant with her 6th child. And she had a lot of sympathy, not just from the people of Kentucky, but from the people from all parts of the United States. Curtis Jett was serving a life sentence in prison in Louisville, and Thomas White was also serving a life sentence in Covington Prison for murder. However, Mrs. Marcum felt that this was not enough, and it was high time that those that paid and ordered the men to kill her husband also went to prison or paid for the crime. Mrs. Marcum placed a $100,000 lawsuit against James and Alex Hargis, Ed Callahan, and Fulton French for the wrongful death of her husband in March of 1904. The money exchange rate, also counting for inflation, for context would be $24.43 for each dollar in 1904 in today's money. So her lawsuit against the men would be a whopping $2,443,000. This amount of money in a damage lawsuit was unheard of in 1904, and so it was covered all over the USA in the papers. She did not put this suit in the Breathitt County courts where the men had political sway among the judge and potential jurors. Instead, she filed the case in the Clark County Circuit Court. The reasoning behind the case being filed against Fulton French had to do with the fact that he was acting attorney for all of the men that were tried for the murder of her husband. He was known at that time to use men who were willing to lie on the stand to give an alibi for his clients and ordered for them to be acquitted. Because of this practice, Marcum named him in the case for his corruption of the court system. The 4 men charged. Now this was not an easy act for Mrs. Marcum. These were the 4 most rich and powerful men in Breathitt County, Kentucky at that time. She was truly taking on a huge case against them. However, her determination to see justice carried out for her husband would strengthen her through the trial to come. According to the Hartford Republican, quote, James Hargis is county judge of Breathitt County. He has long been powerful in county and congressional district politics. He is a Democratic leader in the state politics, a member of the Democratic State Central Committee, and a personal friend of the political counselor of Governor Beckham. Alex Hargis is a former Democratic state senator. He is a shrewd merchant who, with his brother, has been successful in Jackson and has amassed what, in that part of the state, is considered an immense fortune. Edward Callahan is High Sheriff of Bloody Breathitt. He was appointed by Judge Hargis after an election in which such fraudulent practices were resorted to that the appellate court held the election void and the office vacant. He is a Hargis henchman and was formerly of the clan Callahan in the strong Callahan feud, in which much blood was spilled. Fulton French is a man of means who resides in Clark County. He was at one time the leader of the French faction in the sanguinary French-Eversole Feud in Perry County. He is a friend of Callahan and the Hargis brothers, and was employed by the Hargis brothers to defend Curtis Jett. He is now under indictment at Cynthiana for the subordination of perjury in the case. It is charged that he procured perjurers to swear an alibi for Wild Dog, Curtis Jett. Mr. French was not in Jackson when Mr. Marcum was murdered, unquote. This particular case will take on epic proportions in the newspapers, as everyone loves a great underdog seeks justice story. And the idea of a widow taking on four of the most powerful men in eastern Kentucky was sure to stir up a lot of drama in the papers. Details of the three prominent slain men of Breathitt County. The Hartford Republican wrote a huge story about the setup for the lawsuit. It would even go on to mention two other prominent men of the community that dared to stand up to the men and were slain for doing so, Dr. Cox and Town Marshal James Cockrell. Quote, Dr. D.B. Cox was marked. It was known that he would be killed. When the fatal shot was to be fired was definitely not known. That it would be fired from ambush was known, for that was the method of those that take human life in Jackson. Dr. Cox was a practicing physician. He avoided as much as possible going out after nightfall, but one night he was called to a sick bed. He passed the stable in the rear of the Hargis Brothers store. The dull report of a shotgun heavily loaded broke the stillness, and Dr. Cox, unarmed, unwarned, fell riddled with a shot. As he lay writhing in his death agony, the assassins approached, took a shell from his single-barrel shotgun, reloaded, and deliberately fired another charge into the prostrate victim. Quote, They've got Dr. Cox, unquote, was whispered. The expected had happened. James Cockrell was marked. It is known in Jackson that he would be shot from behind. It was thought that the assassins would wait their chance at night, and Cockrell avoided going on the streets at night, but rendered careless of detection by the belief that the law would not reach them, the assassins decided to kill him at the earliest opportunity. What mattered is if they should be seen. In this city of sudden death, no one would dare to say that they saw the murder done. Cockrell was in love with a beautiful girl whose home was in Jackson. He knew his danger. She begged him not to be seen on the streets, even in daylight. Quote, Promise me that you will not go uptown today, unquote, she said. Quote, All right, little girl, unquote, said Cockrell, smiling. Quote, After today, I shall not be seen in Jackson. It is cowardly to let them run me out, but if you say so, I shall leave, unquote. Quote, But today, unquote, the girl pleaded. Quote, Don't go uptown today. They know you're thinking of leaving, and they are desperately anxious to kill you, unquote. Quote, I'm just going to make one trip uptown. It's important, unquote, said Cockrell, and finally persuaded her that there would be no danger at midday with the street crowded with people. Cockrell's object in going uptown was to see a life insurance agent and to have his insurance made payable to the girl he loved and hoped to marry if he lived. When Cockrell neared the courthouse, he heard the report of a rifle, and a steel bullet cut a furrow in the red clay road near his feet. Realizing his danger, he started to run around the corner, hoping to get a building between himself and the assassins, but he ran the wrong way and exposed himself to the men who fired repeatedly from the courthouse windows. One bullet bore a hole through the wood pillar of a porch under which he ran. Another cut through the iron roof of the porch and passed through his throat. Another struck him in the side as he fell. The assassins stood looking out the window, seen by many Jackson citizens. Their work was done. Quote, They've got Cockrell, unquote, was whispered. In the city of sudden death, no one dared to say more. Several men who knew that they could not deny having seen the assassins left Jackson immediately lest they should be marked. James B. Marcum was marked next. For 72 days he was a prisoner in his home, not daring to sit by a lighted window at night, not daring to show his face by day. In a woodland nearby lurked several professional murderers with their rifles, moral perverts whose highest mental development was in the training that made it possible for them to shoot a man dead at 500 yards and slink away into the woods after being paid for the work. After living like a hunted animal for more than 2 months, Mr. Marcum decided to leave Jackson. The problem was how to get out of town alive. Friends advised him to surround himself with the women of his family and walk to the station, as even the professional murderer's hand is stayed when he must shoot a woman or a baby to kill the man who has been marked. Through the streets of Jackson one morning came a strange procession. Bearing his youngest child upon his breast, and surrounded by his sisters and wife, walked James B. Marcum, leaving his home an exile. Enemies of Mr. Marcum stood on the streets, and by loud guffaws, evidenced by their contempt for a man who was afraid. There was no danger, they said, but the marked man had been warned of the plot. He knew his danger. After a period of absences in which he found it impossible to dispose of his property and wind up his affairs in Jackson, Mr. Marcum returned, intending to leave in a short time. Again he kept within doors to escape assassination. Again the manslayer lurked in the woods, awaiting their chance. Finally, on May 5th, legal business compelled Mr. Marcum to go to the courthouse in answer to a summons. Now was the chance of the assassins. Hardly had Mr. Marcum reached the courthouse door and turned to speak to B.J. Ewan, who stood in the doorway, then Tom White walked out of the door, brushing past the lawyer. Laying his hand on Ewan's shoulder, Mr. Marcum said, quote, "Ewan, I am afraid that man means to harm me," unquote. A pistol shot rang out in the courthouse hall. Quote, "My God, they have killed me at last," unquote, cried Marcum, sinking to his knees as the bullet went crashing through his body. Turning and looking down the hallway, Ewan saw Curtis Jett advancing with a pistol in both hands. Jumping aside, he heard another shot. The powder burned the face of the dying man as the assassin leaned forward and fired another into his head. Perhaps 20 men saw the murderer fire the shot, but none dared to speak of it, lest he, too, should be killed, unquote. While we now have the details of what happened to Cox, Cockrell, and Marcum, this has to be investigated. Up to this point, there had been no arrest made in the story until Kentucky Governor John Cripps Wickliffe Beckham set into motion an investigation into the workings of Breathitt County, Kentucky. Governor Beckham's investigation. The public outcry for these cases was so loud that Governor Beckham had to intervene. This would not be a very simple investigation into the facts of the cases. Witnesses needed to be protected, and law and order had to be reinstated in the town. According to the same article, quote, "But this last atrocity turned the eyes of the world on Jackson." By sheer force of public opinion, Governor Beckham was forced to send 3 companies of militia to Jackson to protect witnesses while an investigation was made. His friend Hargis was incensed, and his friend Redwine, the circuit judge, whose name with that of Hargis had been signed to many petitions for pardon when murderers were convicted in his court, did not seem pleased. But the civilized world demanded that systematic assassination be checked in Jackson. As a result of the investigation, Curtis Jett and Thomas White were convicted at Cynthiana after a mistrial at Jackson, and Jett was convicted of the Cockrell murder. The public was disgusted because no apparent effort was made to indict any save the actual murderers, where there seemed notable theory that they had been hired. Quote, "It would be useless to try to indict anyone as an accessory until there is a change and a new judge is elected," unquote, said Jackson citizens. Judge Redwine withdrew from the judicial race. The step was, it is said, advised by Governor Beckham, who felt that the success of the Democratic ticket would be endangered if he continued the race. Judge Riddle was elected. The Redistricting of Breathitt County defeated. It seems that Judge Redwine and Judge Hargis was not finished fighting for the political power that was now slipping through their fingers in Breathitt County. While they would lay low for a short time, they would come out again during the General Assembly to garner support to redistrict the area so that Judge Redwine could once again take his chair over the courts. From this same article, quote, Judge Redwine and Judge Hargis are seen little in the political gatherings until the General Assembly convened. The Democrats in power did not fear to make themselves prominent again, and their fight to create a new judicial district so that Breathitt County could be taken out of Judge Riddle's jurisdiction was a feature of the session. The public and the press belabored the Beckham administration for openly advocating the bold plan of the two political adventurers, and the bill was defeated, unquote. So through the effort of the citizens of Breathitt County and the press, the measure to split Breathitt County off so that Judge Redwine could once again sit on the bench failed. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.